I caught my wife texting her ex while I worked nonstop to pay for our wedding. The truth broke me. She said, "You're too safe for me," 3 weeks later, but the first crack happened at 12:47 a.m., when her phone lit up beside me while she slept. I wasn't trying to snoop. I had just come home from my second shift, boots still on, shoulders aching, brain foggy from too many hours pretending I wasn't tired. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. That's when the screen lit up. A name I hadn't heard in years. "Mark." I whispered, "Why would he be texting you this late?" She turned slightly, eyes still closed, murmured, "What?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "Go back to sleep." She did. I didn't. Earlier that night, she had kissed my cheek and said, "You're doing too much. I don't want you killing yourself for me." I smiled then. "It's temporary. The wedding will be perfect." She laughed softly. "You always take care of everything." I thought that was love. Mark's message preview disappeared before I could read more, but my chest already felt tight. I stared at the ceiling and told myself not to be paranoid. I told myself I was tired. I told myself trust meant not asking questions. A week earlier, she had curled up beside me and said, "I feel so lucky. You're stable. You're safe." Safe. The word echoed now, sharp instead of warm. The next morning, I asked casually, "Did you sleep okay?" She stretched and smiled. "Like a baby." "Why?" "No reason," I said. "Your phone kept lighting up." She didn't look at me. "Probably group chats." I nodded. "Yeah. Probably." That afternoon, I called her from work. "Hey, I might be late again." She sighed. "You're always late." "I know," I said gently. "I'm doing this for us." "I know," she replied, but her voice was distant. "I just miss you." I wanted to say I missed myself too, but I didn't. That night, over dinner, she said, "Mark texted me." My fork paused midair. "Your ex?" She waved her hand. "Relax. He just congratulated us." "For what?" "The wedding," she said quickly. "He saw the photos online." I forced a laugh. "That's weird." "He's harmless," she said. "You trust me, right?" I answered too fast. "Of course." She reached across the table. "I love that you never doubt me." I smiled, even as something inside me whispered that love shouldn't feel like swallowing glass. Later, she leaned her head on my chest and said, "You make me feel secure. Like nothing can go wrong." I kissed her hair. "Nothing will." But when she went to shower, her phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. My hands were shaking, but my heart was louder. "Mark, I miss how we used to talk like this." Another message followed. "Mark, it feels easy again." My throat closed. I sat there, staring, waiting for my brain to catch up to my eyes. She came out of the bathroom and froze. "Why do you have my phone?" I looked up at her. "Why does he miss talking to you?" She crossed her arms. "You went through my phone." "I saw a notification," I said. "Answer the question." She sighed. "You're tired. You're stressed. You're reading too much into this. He says it feels easy again." She snapped, "He's nostalgic." "That's it. Do you tell him things you don't tell me?" I asked. She hesitated. "Just a second." "Enough. You're being unfair," she said. "You're never home." "I'm working," I said quietly. "For us." She looked away. "I didn't ask you to." That hurt more than the messages. I sat back and whispered, "I'm killing myself to build a future." She replied softly, "And I'm suffocating waiting for you to come home." Silence stretched between us. I realized then that while I was building a life for her, she was already rewriting one without me. I met her on a night when I wasn't looking for anyone, and she laughed and said, "That's always when it happens." I smiled and replied, "I wasn't even planning to stay." She leaned closer and said, "Good. Neither was I." We talked for hours that first night. She asked, do you believe people meet for a reason? I said, I think people choose reasons after they meet. She laughed. I like that answer. Later, when the bar emptied and the lights dimmed, she said, I feel like I can talk to you. I asked, about what? She shrugged. Everything. On our third date, she admitted, I don't usually open up like this. I teased, am I special? She looked at me seriously. You feel safe. That word again, back when it meant something warm. She told me about her past, about men who disappeared, about promises that broke. I listened and said, I'm not going anywhere. She looked relieved. I need someone steady. I can be that, I said without thinking. She smiled and rested her head on my shoulder. You already are. We fell into a rhythm. Late night calls. Morning texts. Inside jokes that didn't need explaining. One night she whispered, I've never slept this well next to anyone. I joked, I don't snore. That helps. She laughed. No. It's because you make me feel calm. When she had a bad day, she called me first. I just need to hear your voice. I would say, talk to me. And she always did. She cried once in my car, hands shaking, saying, I'm tired of being strong. I said, you don't have to be with me. She looked at me like I'd given her something precious. That's why I love you. Love came quietly, like it had been waiting. One evening, lying on the floor of my apartment, she said, you're different from other men. I asked, better? She smiled. Safer. I should have asked what that meant. Instead, I let it become my role. I paid attention. I remembered dates. I planned things. When she worried, I reassured. When she doubted herself, I reminded her who she was. She once said, I feel like you hold me together. I answered, that's what partners do. She corrected me. No. That's what you do. The first time she talked about marriage, she said it casually. If I ever got married, I'd want it to feel peaceful. I replied, I'd want that too. She smiled. See? Same brain. When work stressed her out, she'd curl against me and say, promise me you won't ever leave. I kissed her forehead. I'm not built that way. She exhaled like she believed me. I started working more hours when she mentioned wanting a bigger place. I don't want to struggle forever, she said. We won't, I replied. I'll make sure of it. She didn't ask me to sacrifice. I volunteered. She told her friends, he takes care of me. I heard pride in her voice and made it my mission to earn it. One night, she said, I don't need drama. I need stability. I laughed. Then you picked the most boring guy alive. She smiled softly. Boring feels like home. We talked about kids, names, schools. She said, you'd be a good father. I asked, you sure? She nodded. You don't run. I wrapped my identity around that sentence. When I was tired, she'd say, rest. I've got you. When she was scared, she'd whisper, hold me. I learned her moods, her silences, the look she got when she needed reassurance but didn't want to ask. She said once, you make loving easy. I replied, you make it worth it. Looking back, I see how much of myself I poured into being what she needed. I didn't notice when she stopped pouring back. At the time, all I saw was the woman who leaned into me and said, I feel protected with you. I didn't realize protection wasn't passion to her. I didn't realize safety could turn into something she'd resent. I only knew I loved the version of her who reached for my hand and said, don't ever change. And I promised I wouldn't. I noticed the change when she laughed at her phone and then said, it's nothing, before I asked. Who was that? I said. Just someone from work, she replied. Oh, I said. You're tired, she added. You hear things differently when you're tired. A week later, I reached for her phone to check the time. She snapped, why are you touching that? I blinked. I just wanted the clock. She sighed. I don't like people going through my stuff. I wasn't, I said. You're making it weird, she replied, colder. That night, I asked gently, did I do something wrong? She laughed softly. Why would you ask that? You seem distant, I said. I'm stressed, she answered. Not everything is about you. I know, I said quickly. I'm sorry. She nodded like I'd passed a test. She started mentioning Mark like he was weather. Mark said something funny today, she said once. I paused. You talk a lot now. He's just easy to talk to, she replied. So am I said. She smiled thinly. You're overthinking again. I told myself couples change. I told myself love grows quiet. When she stopped telling me about her day, I said, work must be rough. She replied, you wouldn't understand. I laughed weakly. Try me. She shrugged. It's complicated. I let it go. One night, I said, you feel far away. She looked annoyed. You're imagining things. I feel it, I said. You feel guilt for being gone, she replied. That's not my fault. I know, I said. She added, stop turning your stress into accusations. I blamed myself. I worked longer hours. I came home quieter. When she locked the bathroom door to text, I told myself privacy was healthy. When she turned her phone face down, I told myself trust meant silence. Every doubt felt like betrayal on my part. She said one evening, I miss how light things used to feel. I asked, with us? She hesitated. With life. I'm trying, I said. I know, she replied, distracted. You always try too hard. I overheard her on the phone laughing differently. Not the laugh she used with me. Later, I asked, who were you talking to? She said, why are you interrogating me? I'm not, I said. She crossed her arms. Then stop acting insecure. I started apologizing for questions. Sorry, I said often. She replied, I just don't want drama. I don't either, I promised. She nodded. Good. Peace became me swallowing words before they reached my mouth. She said, you're changing. I laughed nervously. From exhaustion. Exactly, she said. You're not present. I'm here, I said. Physically, she answered. I didn't know how to argue that. One night, I whispered, are you happy? She sighed. Why do you always ask heavy questions? I just want to know, I said. She replied, happiness isn't constant. I nodded like that settled everything. I began shrinking to keep her comfortable. I stopped asking. I stopped noticing. When my chest felt tight, I called it stress. When my instincts screamed, I called them fear. I trusted her explanations more than my own reality. She said one last time, you need to relax. I smiled and said, you're right. Inside, something went quiet. I picked up her phone at 1:12 a.m. and told myself I was only going to check the time. The screen unlocked because she had never changed the code. My hand started shaking before I even opened the messages. I said out loud, just look and put it down. My voice sounded strange, like it didn't belong to me. I opened Mark's name. The first message I saw said, I wish you were here instead of him. My stomach dropped. I whispered, no, like saying it might erase the words. I scrolled. Her reply said, it's complicated. You know how he is. I thought, you know how he is, and felt something tear loose inside my chest. Mark wrote, I miss us. I miss how we talk. She answered, me too. It feels easy with you. My hands started sweating. My ears rang. I sat down hard on the bed and pressed my palm against my mouth. Another message popped up. Mark, if things were different, I'd fight for you. Her, sometimes I wish you would. I felt nauseous. I leaned forward and whispered, I am fighting. I kept scrolling even though every word hurt. Mark, do you ever think about meeting? Just to talk. Her, I think about it more than I should. My vision blurred. I remembered her saying, he's harmless. I remembered her laughing and telling me I was overthinking. Mark, you don't sound happy. I'm not unhappy. I'm just, not excited. I heard my own breathing, fast and shallow. I thought about the shifts I picked up. The nights I came home exhausted. The way I kissed her forehead and said, we're building something. Mark, you deserve more than safe. I know. That word hit harder than anything else. Safe. The word she used to describe me like a compliment. I scrolled back, replaying dates in my head. Her phone lighting up. Her smiles. Her distance. Every lie rearranged itself into the truth. She stirred beside me and murmured, "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. She sat up and said, "Why do you have my phone?" I turned the screen toward her. "Explain this." She went pale. "You invaded my privacy. You told him you wish he'd fight for you," I said. "What am I doing?" She rubbed her face. "You're twisting it." "How?" I asked. "Use small words." She snapped, "I was venting." "You were planning," I said. "You were choosing." She shook her head. I was confused. I laughed, short and broken. "Confused people don't talk about meeting." She raised her voice. "You weren't here." "I was working," I said. "For us." She said quietly, "That's the problem." Something inside me went numb. "So every time you said I was imagining things." She interrupted, "I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to stop," I replied. She looked away. "I didn't sleep with him." I stared at her. "That's your defense?" She said, "It wasn't physical. It was intimate," I said. "It was emotional. It was a choice." She whispered, "I felt lonely." "I felt invisible," I said. She tried to reach for me. "Please don't do this right now." I pulled back. "Don't touch me." My hands were still shaking. My mouth tasted bitter. I felt like I was watching my life from far away. I said, "Every time you said you loved me." She cut in, "I meant it." "When?" I asked. "Before or after you told him it was easy with him?" She started crying then. I didn't know how to stop. I stood up slowly. "You didn't want to." She said, "I chose you." I laughed again. "You chose comfort. You chose safety. You didn't choose me." She whispered my name. I didn't answer. I walked into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the man looking back. He looked smaller. Older. Replaceable. "When I came back," she said, "we can fix this." I shook my head. "You already broke it." She said, "It didn't mean anything." I said, "It meant everything." I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy and hollow. That night, I finally understood she wasn't torn between two people. She had already decided. I didn't raise my voice. That was the first thing that scared her. She sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Why are you so quiet?" I replied, "I'm listening." She frowned. "Say something." "I already heard everything," I said. She crossed her arms. "So what, you're just going to punish me with silence?" I shook my head. "I'm not punishing you. I'm deciding." She scoffed. "You're acting like I cheated." "You did," I said calmly. She stood up. "It wasn't physical." "I know," I replied. "That makes it worse." She laughed nervously. "You're being dramatic." I met her eyes. "I'm being honest." She paced. "I told you, I was lonely. I was tired," I said. "There's a difference." She stopped. "So now you're blaming me for having feelings?" "I'm blaming you for your choices," I answered. She exhaled sharply. "You weren't there." "I was working," I said. "So you could have what you wanted." She snapped, "I never asked you to sacrifice everything." "I know," I said. "I chose to." She softened her voice. "And I appreciated it." "No," I replied. You benefited from it. Her face tightened. That's unfair. What's unfair, I said, is pretending you didn't know what you were doing. She shook her head. You don't understand how empty I felt. I nodded slowly. I understand that you filled that emptiness with someone else. She raised her voice. I didn't plan for it to happen. But you let it continue, I said. She whispered, I didn't want to lose you. I said, you already did. That's when her eyes filled. Not before. Not when I read the messages. Not when I walked away from the bed. Only when I stayed calm. She stepped closer. Please don't shut me out. I replied, I'm not shutting you out. I'm stepping back. She touched my arm. We can fix this. I moved away. I don't want to. Her breath caught. You don't mean that. I do, I said. She laughed, panicked. You're just hurt. I'm clear, I answered. She wiped her face. Think about the wedding. I have, I said. I'm canceling it. Her eyes widened. You can't do that. I can, I said. And I am. She grabbed my hand. We've paid deposits. I know, I replied. Her voice shook. My family will survive, I said. She stared at me. You're serious? Yes. She started crying then, really crying. You're ruining everything. I said quietly, you already did. She dropped onto the bed. I made a mistake. You made a series of choices, I corrected. She looked up at me. Don't throw us away. I'm not, I said. I'm choosing myself. She shook her head. You're being cold. I'm being done, I replied. She whispered, after everything I gave you? I laughed softly. You gave me trust until you didn't. She wiped her tears angrily. You think you're better than me now? No, I said. I think I deserve better. That silence hit harder than any argument. She looked small then. Not remorseful. Afraid. She said, what am I supposed to do? I answered, figure out why you needed someone else to feel alive. She said, I need you. I replied, you needed attention. She flinched. That's cruel. It's accurate, I said. She stood up, desperate. Please don't walk away like this. I grabbed my jacket. I already have. She followed me to the door. Say something comforting. I paused and said, I hope you learn from this. She whispered my name. I opened the door. That was the moment I felt the power shift. Not because I won. But because I stopped begging. I walked out without slamming anything. And she finally understood silence could be louder than love. The apartment felt hollow after she left, and I stood in the middle of the living room and said, so this is it. No one answered. I sat on the couch and whispered, you really ended everything, and the silence stayed loyal. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and said, I gave you everything, then laughed quietly because the room didn't care. The next morning, my phone rang. I answered, yeah. Jake said, you alive? Barely, I replied. He paused. I'm coming over. Do what you want, I said. When he walked in, he looked around and said, looks empty. It feels worse, I replied. He sat across from me and asked, you eat? I shook my head. Forgot. That tracks, he said. We sat quietly until he said, I won't sugarcoat this. Please don't, I replied. She didn't accidentally do this, he said. She chose it. I know, I said. You let yourself disappear to keep her comfortable, he added. That hurts, I said. It should, he replied. I leaned back and said, I thought love meant sacrifice. He answered, love doesn't mean erasing yourself. I rubbed my eyes. I don't know who I am without fixing someone. That's the part you grieve, he said. That night, after he left, I walked through the apartment and said, I abandoned myself. The word stayed in the air. I stood in the bedroom and said, I ignored my instincts. Nothing argued. I lay on the bed and whispered, I stayed when I should have walked. The ceiling didn't forgive me, but it didn't judge me either. At 3 in the morning, I said, I miss who I was with her. Then I corrected myself. No. I miss who I pretended to be. I sat up and said, I don't have to be that anymore. The quiet listened. The next day, I called Jake and said, I feel empty. He replied, good. That means there's room now. For what? I asked. For you, he said. That night, I cooked for myself and said, this feels strange. I ate alone and said, but it feels honest. I slept 4 hours and woke up thinking, that's enough for now. I looked in the mirror and said, I lost myself trying to keep someone. Then I said, I won't do that again. The quiet didn't argue. For the first time since everything broke, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. And for the first time, I let myself breathe inside it. I stood in the venue office and said, I need to cancel the reservation. The woman behind the desk looked up. The wedding? Yes, I replied. It's not happening. She hesitated. You understand the deposit is non-refundable. I understand, I said. I want it released to me anyway. She nodded slowly. I'll process it. When I walked outside, I exhaled and said, that's done. My phone rang. It was my mother. She said, is it true? Yes, I answered. She sighed. What happened? I chose myself, I said. There was silence. Then she said, I wish you'd called sooner. I didn't know how, I replied. Later that day, my sister asked, are you okay? I don't know yet, I said. But I will be. She said gently, people will talk. I know, I answered. They always do. She smiled sadly. I'm proud of you. I hung up and said, that helps. I signed the lease for a small apartment and told the landlord, I need something quiet. He said, fresh start. Yes, I replied. I walked into the empty space and said, this is mine. No memories echoed. No arguments lingered. I sat on the floor and laughed. I bought peace. That night, my father called. He said, I heard about the wedding. It's cancelled, I said. He cleared his throat. Are you sure? I've never been more sure, I replied. He paused. I stayed once when I shouldn't have. I didn't answer. He added, I'm glad you didn't. I swallowed and said, me too. The next week, I told my boss, I'm taking time off. He raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? No, I said. But it will be. He nodded. Take what you need. I sat in my car afterward and said, I didn't apologize. That felt new. I scheduled therapy and told the counselor, I forgot who I was. She asked, when did that start? When I made someone else my purpose, I said. She replied, we can work on that. I nodded. I want to. I unpacked slowly, placing things where I wanted them. I said, no compromises. I threw away wedding brochures and whispered, you don't own me. One afternoon, my aunt called. She said, you embarrassed the family. I replied, I protected myself. She scoffed. Marriage takes work. So does healing, I said. She hung up. I didn't chase her. I sat on my balcony and said, I don't owe everyone access. That sentence settled into me. I bought a new bed and said, this one is for rest. I cooked meals I liked and said, this is enough. At night, guilt crept in and whispered, you failed. I answered, I survived. I walked through my apartment and said, I didn't lose money. I paused and added, I bought my life back. Jake came over and looked around. He said, this feels different. It's quieter, I replied. He smiled. So are you. I nodded. I stopped explaining myself. He said, that's power. I sat down and said, I don't feel angry anymore. He replied, you feel free. I leaned back and said, I used to think success meant building something for someone else. He asked, what does it mean now? I smiled. It means not abandoning myself. That night, alone, I stood by the window and said, I choose me. The words didn't feel selfish. They felt overdue. And for the first time, my future felt like it belonged to me. She texted me after 3 months of silence and wrote, can we talk? I stared at the message and said out loud, so now. I waited an hour before replying, about what? She answered fast. I just need to explain. I typed, deleted, then sent, you already did. She called instead. I let it ring twice, then answered. Hello. Her voice sounded smaller. I didn't think you'd pick up. I didn't think you'd call, I replied. She took a breath. He's gone. I said, I know. She paused. How? You always leave patterns, I said. So does he. She whispered, it didn't work. I figured, I replied. She rushed, it wasn't what I thought it would be. I leaned back and said, it rarely is. She sounded offended. You don't have to be cold. I'm not, I said. I'm calm. She sniffed. I miss you. I answered, you miss stability. That's not fair, she said. It's accurate, I replied. She exhaled shakily. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I know, I said. She waited for more. I didn't add anything. She said, don't you want to ask me anything? No, I replied. Her voice cracked. I thought you'd be angry. I was, I said. I'm not anymore. She said, I can't sleep. I can, I replied. That silence hit her harder than shouting ever did. She said, I didn't think you'd move on so fast. I didn't move on, I said. I moved inward. She asked quietly, are you seeing someone? No, I answered. I'm seeing myself. She scoffed weakly. You always talk like that now. I always should have, I replied. She hesitated. I thought we had something special. We did, I said. You traded it. She said, I was confused. I replied, you were decisive. She started crying. He left when things got hard. I said, I stayed when they did. She whispered, I didn't think you'd really walk away. That's the difference between us, I replied. She said, I need you. I answered, you need to sit with what you chose. She raised her voice. Why are you being like this? Because I respect myself now, I said. She went quiet. Then she said, I thought you'd save me. I replied, I'm not your anchor anymore. Her breathing was uneven. I don't know who I am without you. That's something you should have learned before, I said. She asked, can we meet? Just to talk. No, I replied. She sounded desperate. Why not? Because I don't need closure, I said. You do. She whispered my name. I didn't respond. She said, I'm sorry. I know, I replied. She waited. I stayed silent. She finally asked, is there any chance? I said calmly, no. She cried openly then. I ruined everything. You ruined us, I said. You didn't ruin me. She said, I thought you'd always be there. I was, I replied. Until you weren't. She went quiet again. I don't know how to live with this. I answered, you will. She said, you sound different. I am, I replied. She asked, are you happy? I paused and said, I'm at peace. She whispered, I wish I had chosen you. I replied, I wish you had chosen yourself sooner. She hung up without saying goodbye. I placed my phone down and said, that chapter is closed. I didn't feel victory. I felt light. For the first time, her regret didn't pull me back. It confirmed I had already moved forward. I woke up to sunlight spilling across the floor and said, no one owes me anything today. I brewed coffee and whispered, this is mine. Steam curled toward the ceiling like a small victory. I sat by the window and took the first sip. "This is quiet," I said. "And I like it." Jake called. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. "You sound calm," he said. "I am," I answered. "Even after everything?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Even after everything." He laughed softly. "I thought you'd still be angry." "I was," I said. Then I realized anger doesn't fix anyone. He paused. "You're different now." "I know," I said. "I see myself clearly for the first time." I looked outside and said, "No one else dictates my peace anymore." Jake asked, "Does it hurt less?" I took a long sip of coffee. "It hurts, but it doesn't control me." He replied, "That's huge." I nodded. "It's the first morning I've had where I don't feel missing someone." Jake chuckled. "You've been holding your breath for months." "I know," I said. "And now I can finally exhale." I stared at the empty streets and whispered, "I used to measure myself by her happiness." "Not anymore?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said. "I measure by mine." I checked my phone. No messages. No reminders. Just silence. I said aloud, "I can live with this silence." Jake asked, "Do you ever think about going back?" "Never," I replied. "I've already gone forward." I poured another cup and said, "I feel lighter than I have in years." He said, "You earned that." "I did," I said. "It didn't come from revenge. It came from letting go." Jake laughed softly. "You sound peaceful." "I am," I replied. "Peaceful and whole." I looked at my reflection in the coffee and whispered, "I survived. I grew. I chose me." He asked, "Are you afraid of being alone?" "No," I said. "I'm afraid of losing myself again." "That's different." I placed the cup down and said, "I can fill my life with joy, not someone else's approval." Jake replied, "That's freedom." "Yes," I said. "It's the kind you feel in the quiet, in the mornings when no one else is around." I walked to the balcony and breathed deep. "I can't change the past." "I don't need to." He asked, "And her?" I smiled faintly. "Her story is hers. Mine doesn't need her anymore." Jake said, "You sound like yourself again." "I am," I said. "I didn't lose love, I found myself." The sun warmed my face. I whispered, "The grief doesn't define me. The choices do." Jake said, "So what now?" I looked at the streets below and said, "Now, I live for me. For quiet mornings. For my peace. For freedom." He chuckled. "That's powerful." I nodded. "It's enough." I took one last sip and said softly, "I didn't win by leaving her. I won the moment I stopped begging someone to love me back." And in that silence, I finally felt whole.